Hello, boys and girls. It's Auntie Janet checking in with you, and I'm excited. Today is week number 5, part 5 of our story, No Darkness at All. We've spent the last 4 weeks learning about Hamid and his sister Kinza. Last week we were introduced to the nurse's niece, Jenny, the young girl who came from England, and we learned how at the end of the story with Jenny last week, here was Jenny speaking to the nurse, and how Jenny realized that Jesus is the light of the world and that she had a need of asking Jesus to be her Savior, and she prayed and asked the Lord to be her Savior. I must hurry and tell you what happens because we need to finish our story today. As you know, Jenny and her mom and dad are visiting Morocco and her aunt from England, because Jenny has been sick and the doctor ordered her to come and get better in the warm weather. Well, by having Jenny at the nurse's house, things changed a little bit for Hamid. Hamid used to love to come every night to have supper at the nurse's house with the boys and see his little sister Kinza. And while he had gotten to know the nurse, she learned that Hamid really wanted to learn how to read. So she began to teach Hamid every day. He would come and teach him how to read. And his one goal in learning how to read was that he wanted to know how to read the Bible, because he wanted to be able to go back one day and tell his mom what the Bible said about Jesus. But now that Jenny was here, the plans for his reading lessons sort of got pushed aside, and to be honest, Hamid didn't really like Jenny that much. He thought she was a little bit stuck up, and she sort of ruined his plans a bit, and he started to get a bit angry and jealous about Jenny. But then, he realized that Jenny and her mom and dad were showing much kindness to Kinza. So Hamid chose to not get angry at Jenny and just said, well, she's only here to visit for a few more weeks, and I'll just put my reading lessons on hold until she leaves, and then I'll go back to learn how to read the Bible. So life went back to normal. Hamid went each day and worked with the man who made the fried donut rings throughout the day until lunchtime, and then he would meet up with his friends. They'd get something to eat at supper time. They'd go to the nurse's house, have supper, have a Bible story. He'd see Kinza, and day after day went by. Things were in a nice little routine until after one evening, the nurse said to Hamid, maybe tomorrow we'll stop by your donut stall and see you, because I'm taking Jenny, her mom and dad, and we'll bring Kinza with us, and we're going to walk through the market and show her around the city. So if we're near you, we'll stop by and see you. Hamid was excited. He thought maybe he would get a sale and they would sell some donuts. So he got up the next morning, went to work, and was busy working. He sort of looked down the street watching for them coming, and he noticed down the street a little far ways off that the nurse and Jenny and her parents and Kinza were making their way slowly through the stalls in the marketplace, heading his way. He was excited for them to come. But then, his eyes were coming back towards his work, he looked, and across the street, he saw something that made his heart stop. There, across the street, standing looking at Jenny and Kinza and the nurse and her parents, was none other than Hamid's stepfather. What was he doing here? Had the word got back to him from those police officers on horseback that Hamid and Kinza were here? Oh no! What was he going to do? Hamid was scared to death. He quickly ducked down behind the counter, and his mind started racing. What could he do? What could he do? He saw that his stepfather was staring up the street and had probably already seen Kinza. Hamid knew he had to make a plan. How could he make sure that he and Kinza were safe? Quickly his mind raced. He thought, there's no way that Jenny's dad and mom and the nurse would ever let Kinza out of their sight, so Kinza's probably safe. But you know what? I'm not safe. If my stepfather sees me, he's going to get me, he'll beat me, and he'll force me to go and steal Kinza and bring her back so that he could sell her to the beggar. Hamid was so scared. He thought, the only way I can be safe is I've got to get out of here and I've got to hide. So without Even telling his boss, Hamid quickly stood up and took off running away from the donut stall and headed straight up to the hills. His heart was pounding. He ran. He didn't dare look behind him to see if anybody was chasing him, and off he went. Once he felt that he was far enough away, he hid in the trees in the forest there on the side of the mountain, and with deep breath, he sat there till he caught his breath and thought, I'm safe. It doesn't look like anybody followed me, and I've just got to hope that Kinza's safe as well. I'm going to stay here for probably 2 whole days, and then hopefully my stepfather will be gone, and it will be safe for me to go back. Well, Hamid spent all day in the woods. He found some berries to eat. He made himself a little bed that night in amongst the trees, and he fell asleep. He woke up the next morning, and he was going to spend all day hiding in the woods again, when suddenly he heard a voice say, Hamid, Hamid. I know that voice. That's the voice of the nurse. Why would she be here, and why is she calling me? Hamid, are you there? Hamid, one of your friends told me you ran to the hills. Hamid, Hamid. Hamid knew that voice. He looked out from where he was hiding and popped up and scared the nurse. She wasn't expecting him to see him so quickly like that. Hamid said, I'm here, but what are you doing here? The nurse said, you scared me, Hamid. What do you mean, what am I doing here? We have a problem, Hamid. We have a big problem. We're in trouble. Hamid looked at her and said, you don't look like you're in trouble. What trouble? What's the trouble? Hamid, Kinza, she's disappeared, Hamid. Where is she? Do you have her? No, ma'am, I don't have her. Then he hung his head down and he says, but I can tell you who does have her. She said, what do you mean? My stepfather has her. I'm sure of it. Your stepfather? Hamid, you're not making sense. How could your stepfather have Kinza? She said, Kinza was walking with Jenny in the market yesterday, and the adults, we were looking at some beautiful cloth in the market, and we turned our head just for a minute, and Jenny said that Kinza was right beside her, and then when she turned, Kinza was gone. How can you say it's your stepfather? Hamid said, but I saw my stepfather. He was in the village yesterday. When I was working with the man cooking the donuts, I looked up, I saw him staring at you. Why didn't you say something, Hamid? Why did you run away and not tell us? Hamid said, I thought that you and Jenny's parents would look after her and that there would be no chance of him grabbing her. So I was afraid for myself. I ran here because I was afraid he would find me and beat me. Oh, Hamid, we've both done wrong. We didn't care for Kinza, and you ran away, and neither one of us protected her. We must get her back, Hamid. Yes, Hamid said, we must get her back. I know my stepfather has taken her. I know he's probably taken her back to our home in our village. Yes, the nurse said, I'm sure he has, but we must make a plan. And we're going to go to your village and get her back. What do you mean, go to my village? Get her back? You can't do that. You don't even know where my village is. Then you are going to help us. Me? I can't go back there. Do you know what they'll do to me if I go back to that village? Don't worry, Hamid. We promise to protect you. And the nurse coaxed him to follow her down to the village. They went back to her house and they made a plan. Early the next morning, Hamid climbed into the back of Jenny's parents' car. It was him and the nurse, and Jenny's dad was driving the front. His friends from the streets and all the boys who came to Bible study each night waved at him. They thought it was so cool that Hamid was getting an opportunity to ride in a car. And Hamid smiled and had a brave face, but inside his heart was pitter-pattering. He was so afraid. What's going to happen to me? What will happen to me when I get back there? What if they see me? And they started to drive. And you remember from the beginning of the story, it took Hamid 7 days and nights to walk from his village to the nurse's village. Well, in a car, it's much, much faster. But they drove and they drove and they drove. And as they got closer to Hamid's village, Jenny's dad and the nurse kept saying, Hamid, do not worry, we will protect you. This is the plan. All you have to do is when we get in the village, you must show us where your house is. Then you will stay back by the car and will not go anywhere near the house. And Jenny's dad and I will go and speak to your stepfather and try to get Kinza back. Sounded like a good enough plan. But then Hamid began to think, but how can I go back to my village and be so close to my mom who I love and not see her? But I can't go near my stepfather. Well, late in the afternoon, as supper time was coming around and it was starting to get dark, they finally arrived in Hamid's village. They couldn't drive the big car up the mountain pass to his house, so they pulled the car into the marketplace and quietly they got out. Hamid got Jenny's dad and the nurse to follow him up the mountain path as they started to climb towards his house. He went a little bit farther until he could see his house. And then he pointed out to them and said, do you see that big fig tree? They said, yes. That's my house, the little yellow house right behind the fig tree. That's where you must go. Okay, Hamid, you stay here. Do not come any closer. We will go and see if we can find Kinza. So off Jenny's dad and the nurse went. They arrived at the door. They knocked on the door and they could hear shuffling around inside the door. And suddenly, the stepfather arrived at the door. Hello, he said. Jenny's dad stood there and the nurse stood there. And the nurse said to Hamid's stepfather, hello, she says. About 7 months ago, a young boy named Hamid brought his little sister Kinza to me in a village far away. Kinza is blind. I have been looking after her for 7 months, caring for her, feeding her, have given her a good home. But yet just yesterday she disappeared and we would really like to have her back. And we're wondering, do you know where she is? Hamid's stepfather looked at the nurse and Jenny's dad and put his hands in front of him and said, why are you coming here? I know nothing of this. And he lied straight to the nurse. I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about this young girl, Kinza, me getting her back. Yes, Hamid took her away 7 months ago, but I have not seen her. As the stepfather told the nurse this lie, the nurse looked around the room and she noticed in one corner was Hamid's mom sitting there. And Hamid's mom had a funny look on her face and kept tipping her head like this to one side. As the nurse watched and turned her head to the way that Hamid's mom pointed her head, she noticed an older lady sitting there. We know it's the other stepmom. And beside the stepmom, there was a blanket beside her, and the blanket was moving a little bit. While this conversation was going on, Hamid couldn't help himself, but he had crept closer to the house, and he was standing outside looking in through the window. He overheard the nurse talking to his stepfather and knew his stepfather was lying. He saw his mom give the little symbol of tipping her head and saw the blanket move. And the nurse started walking towards the blanket, and as she did, Hamid couldn't help himself, but he called out in a loud voice, Kinza! Kinza! And what should happen? But the blanket moved, the blanket came off, and Kinza let out a happy cry. She knew that voice. It was Hamid's voice. She knew that voice. The nurse came by, picked Kinza up, and put her in her arms. The stepfather was so angry. Who do you think you are coming here? This is Kinza, my stepdaughter. You have no right to come in here and take her back. Who do you think you are? And he started to rant. Jenny's dad stepped up in front of the nurse and little Kinza, and he said, Sir, we are willing to look after this girl and take care of her. We understand that you wanted to sell her to the beggar. We will give you a better price, and we will raise her as our own child and adopt her. Please do not cause problems. The stepfather was still very angry, and he started to talk to them. And while he talked to Jenny's dad and the nurse, he didn't notice. But who should sneak out of the house but Hamid's mom? She came down the path. She followed it all the way down into the marketplace, close to the car where Hamid had run off and was hiding near the car. And he heard a voice say, Hamid, Hamid, are you there? He knew the voice of his own mom. Mother, is that you? He crept out from the shadows. He gave his mom the biggest hug. She held his face. She kissed him. Hamid, Hamid, you did what I asked. You took Kinza to the lady. Yes, mother, I took her to the nurse. I found the picture of that man. That man, mother, his name is Jesus. Jesus is the light of the world. I'm learning all about him. I'm learning to read, mother. I want to read the Bible. Oh, Hamid, you're such a good son. Thank you. Thank you for looking after Kinza. But I miss you so. Please, please come back to me. And she knew that she couldn't talk long because they heard voices coming. She quickly gave Hamid a hug and said, go, my boy, but come back as soon as you can. Mother, I make you a promise. As soon as it's time for the harvesting of the vegetables, I will come back to you. I will learn to read and I will come back to tell you of Jesus. Please do, she said. Hamid's mom left and Hamid quickly went back down to his hiding place near the car. The nurse, carrying little Kinza, Jenny's dad were walking slowly down the path because it was dark now. It was difficult to see. They were getting close to the car. And Hamid thought, wow, they got Kinza back. This was easier than what I thought. Just as he was about to come out of the shadows and talk to them, they heard an angry voice and thumping footsteps. It was his stepfather running down the path. Wait, wait, he yelled. You may take Kinza. You have paid me for Kinza. But I know my boy Hamid is here somewhere. I want my boy. Give him back to me. They were close to the car. Jenny's dad opened the back door quickly and told Hamid, jump in. Hamid jumped in the car. The nurse and Kinza jumped in the back. Jenny's dad turned on the car with the roar of the engine and put his car in reverse. And the story says he reversed and then roared out of the town before the stepfather could catch him. Hamid was thrown back in the car with the force of the quick takeoff, and his heart was pounding once again. He couldn't believe they had safely made it out of his village. They drove and they drove, and the next day they made it back safely to the town where the nurse lived and where Hamid had lived. Well, Hamid went back to his job the next day, working for the donut man, and Jenny and her parents stayed for another 2 weeks on holidays. They watched very carefully because Hamid's mom had warned them, your stepfather will come again and try and steal Kinza again. Don't let her out of your sight. Well, after 2 weeks had gone by, it was time for Jenny to return to England. They packed up the car here with her mom and dad and got ready to go. Then the morning that they were going to leave, Hamid overheard the nurse talking to Jenny's parents. And she said to them, but it will be so much better for her. You must look after her. Blind children have so many more opportunities in England than here in Morocco. She could go to a school for the blind. Hamid thought, they're talking about Kinza. Kinza? Going to England? Kinza? Leaving me here in Morocco and going so far away? What was this plan? Hamid went to the nurse and asked her, what are you talking about? Why are you saying something about Kinza and England? The nurse told him, Hamid, we have spoken for many nights, Jenny's mom and dad and I, and we believe that for Kinza to have the best opportunity, she should go back with them and live with them in England. They can be her family. She can go to a special school where she can learn to read Braille, where she puts her fingers on the pages and learns to read, and can go to school for children who have blindness. She has a much better opportunity in England than here. How can we make her stay here? Hamid, I think it's better for her. But Jenny's parents have made me a promise that if she goes to England, she must be taught of Jesus and learn that Jesus is the light of the world. Hamid thought and thought. You mean to say I'm never going to see my sister again? Well, I'm hoping she'll come back, but I can't promise you. But he knew in his heart that it was the best thing for Kinza. So that morning, once they got all ready, Jenny, little Kinza, her mom and dad came and said goodbye. Hamid hugged Kinza. Tears streamed down his face as he said goodbye to his little sister, knowing that she would have a better life, but wondering when would he ever see her again. As the car drove down the street, Hamid, yes, he's 11 years old, but he wasn't ashamed. The tears kept streaming down his face. I love my sister. Yes, Hamid, I know you do. And I want to see her again. Hamid, now that Kinza's gone, how would you like to come and stay in my house with me and be my boy just as I looked after Kinza? Really? Would you do that for me? And right away Hamid wanted to say yes, but then he looked at the nurse and he said, no, I cannot do this. I have made a promise to my mom. My promise to my mom is I want to learn how to read so I can read the Bible and go back and tell her of Jesus. And if I come and live with you, the boys in the streets will never listen to me as I try to tell them of Jesus. They'll think I'm different and I'm special and not one of them. I must stay and live the life that I have. I will still come to you to learn to read. I'll come to Bible lessons each night. But thank you for your kind offer. No, I'll do as I always have and sleep out in the streets with the other boys. Hamid kept his promise. The nurse kept her promise. And day after day for several months, he went to our house and learned how to read. He learned of Jesus and was reminded that Jesus is the light of the world. And as the seasons changed and the harvest time came, the day came when Hamid took his brand new Bible that the nurse had given to him, put it in his pouch, had his staff, and told the nurse, I'm 12 now. It's time to go back. I've learned to read. I know the way, that Jesus is the light of the world. But in my village, my villagers don't know that. And more importantly, my mom doesn't know that. And I must go back and share the news that Jesus is the light of the world. He remembered his verse. Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of light. John 8:12. Hamid left. He didn't know what reaction he would get. He thought his stepfather would probably be angry at him because now he believed in Jesus, but he didn't care. He had a message to share, and he was going to go back and be a missionary in his own village to tell his mom and others of Jesus. The story doesn't end there. Kinza did go back to England. She lived with Jenny's family, and later when Kinza got older, Kinza came to know that Jesus is the light of the world and trusted Jesus as her Savior as well. I hope you've enjoyed this story about Hamid and Kinza. It reminds me that each one of us need to be a witness and a testimony for Jesus, to tell others that Jesus is the light of the world. And just in conclusion, there's a song that we used to sing in Sunday school that tells about the need of us to be missionaries, and I'm going to sing it to you just as we close. It says this: Stop and let me tell you what the Lord has done for me. Stop and let me tell you what the Lord has done for me. For he forgave my sins and he saved my soul. He cleansed my heart and he made me whole. So stop and let me tell you what the Lord has done for me. Go and tell the story of the Christ of Calvary. Go and tell the story of the Christ of Calvary. He will forgive their sins. He will save their soul. He will cleanse their heart. He will make them whole. So go and tell the story of the Christ of Calvary.